thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Events, programs, and
Hello, welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. Welcome to the show. As always, in top reality, thank you for your calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC's TV Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show now in its 27th season. We can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m., again at 6 p.m., and on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. We look forward to you joining us every week because we have this wonderful dialogue that we bring to you to look at current affairs, community affairs, public affairs here in the greater Houston area. We know that we've really heightened this discussion lately in the last few months, given the post-George Floyd environment that we find ourselves in, and we're going to continue to do so in weeks and months to come going forward. I have a great guest for you today. It is one that I've been wanting to have on for a little while, and last few weeks we've both been too busy doing a lot of other things, so hard to nail him down. And that is none other than the senior pastor of South Main Baptist Church, Dr. Steve Wells. Before I introduce him officially, let me say that you may know that name, you may know that face in the last few weeks. He was the white pastor. I use that word with love and affection. He was the only white pastor on the dais with 7 other African-American pastors at George Floyd's funeral. And he gave a challenge that day. The challenge was this, the challenge to all white churches or all congregations and denominations. And he gave it from his heart. Now, I say that for a reason, because I know his heart. He and I have been friends for quite a few years now. We have a great relationship based on mutual trust and respect. The nation now knows him. He now has become clearly a national figure because the articles and things that you see on the news about this Texas pastor, referred to as this Texas pastor, the white pastor at George Floyd's funeral. But I wanted Steve to be on today to talk about how that reality affects us here in Houston and how he has been doing so much work just before all of this happened, but now since that happened around this area. And I'll just use one quote that he used at the service, which I think sets it all in the proper context. We are better than we used to be, but we're not as good as we ought to be. We have a lot of work to do, so welcome, Dr. Stephen Wells.
Thanks. Really glad to be with you. Thanks for the invitation today.
Great to have you here. This is an inflection time. This is for such a time as this that we all come together. Tell us kind of how life was in the pre-George Floyd reality and how it's kind of been in this post-George Floyd reality.
It's certainly been two different things. You know, March the 12th, we met as a pastoral team to talk about this pandemic that was coming up and making the decision to go online only for our services. So in the middle of March to the beginning of June, working from home, going up to the church on Sunday morning to have a live broadcast of our service and trying to ramp up a digital church for the first time. So online Sunday school and making sure that we're caring for our most vulnerable folks and folks who don't have internet access. You know, even in the church, we start with the premise that everybody's got to be treated fairly and equally. And so how do we care for people who don't have the same kind of technology? So those were the days. And then, you know, we were watching the news and saw George Floyd being murdered there on television, that now famous video in those 8 minutes and 46 excruciating seconds, and trying to make sense of what did all that mean. And then I got a call from Pastor Remus Wright inviting me to come and speak at Fountain of Praise Church and to be a part of that service. And I got to tell you that was, you know, it was humbling. And I was honored, of course, to be asked and terrified. And I wanted to not embarrass the people who'd invited me and wanted to get the moment right. And I remember even driving to the service. Of course, the other 2 services have been broadcast nationally. And my wife asked, do you think they're going to record this? Like we didn't even have a sense on the way to the church of what a global event it would be. And had a parking pass to get there. They were supposed to limit to 500, but how could you limit that event? I mean, there were people who came, and so there were the logistical complications. I thought the church just did an amazing job putting together hundreds of volunteers to get the people to the right place at the right time, dealing with the media literally from around the world. And then after I spoke, I was getting texts. I have a friend in England who said, I was just watching you on the BBC. Got communication from people in South Africa. It's just, it truly was a global event. And so then to finish your question, in the time since then, I've gotten calls from any number of friends in the community and people I have known in different ways to be a part of panel discussions, with Reverend Dr. Ralph Douglas West at the Church Without Walls, with Dr. Kirby John Caldwell at Windsor Village, with Dr. Marcus Cosby at Wheeler Avenue, and just trying to figure out how can our churches come together? How can we be honest about race and the original sin of America, which clearly is racism? How can the church help bring healing to our country? And that's been a consuming part of my days. And now, you and I share together a task that the mayor's given us, which is to look at specifically how policing in our city works, and what can we do to bring some reform to that place in a way that's responsible and visionary.
I'm going to wait for the after the break. We'll dive a little deeper into the mayor's task force on policing reform. But let's use the first part of the show. I want to kind of get that broader context. So
Sure.
The image of police officer killing George Floyd, reality rushed in. A critical mass of white people finally saw and heard and felt what Black people have been trying to say for years. Suddenly, everyone is paying attention. So now they're loudly declaring their support and their commitment of what it means to be an anti-racist, and everybody wants to do something. How have you seen that played out, even among members of your congregation, for whom before the George Floyd, you had a little conversations now and then about race and racism, because we've actually had some events at your church that I've been part of through Interfaith Ministries. You've hosted me when I was at the Search for the Homeless, when we did the event for the homeless. So I know there's been some discussion and dialogue over the years, but that was a little bit here and there, now and then. Has there been much more of that in the post environment?
Sure. And I've spoken to really strong leaders in our church who I think of as strategic and visionary, and they're talking about events through their work that, a major law firm in the city that now at the partners call, they've dedicated time for their African American partners and for their African American associates to just tell the real experience of what it's been like working in their law firm and where they've experienced racism from their colleagues, to tell experiences about what it's been like to live in the world today. And what I've said is, I don't know if my friends have been telling me these stories all along and I just haven't been listening, or if post George Floyd, people are more willing to tell the stories. Will Smith said, racism hasn't gotten worse, it's gotten recorded.
Right.
And so now the visceral reality of seeing it in so many different places, all you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Karen, and you can watch 1,000 different people behaving badly.
There's a lot of Karens out there.
A lot of Karens out there. What I'm hearing from our key leadership is not just in the context of the church, but in their workplaces, they're having a space for dialogue, and they're astounded by what they're discovering in their own work cultures and trying to figure out, how do we right this that is a wrong? It's a violation of how we want to be together.
Let's just use the law firms since you brought them up, because this has been an issue in Houston for years. The number or the lack of numbers of persons of color in law firms, in the legal profession, particularly in the ranks of partners, et cetera. This has been an ongoing thing. It's been documented. There have been studies. There have been articles in the Chronicle. People have run the numbers and statistics. And now that I find it interesting, because I've heard the same thing about a second law firm, a larger law firm in Houston, that also had this aha moment. And it's kind of woke up and said, well, oh, how are things in our own shop? What's been happening? Well, people have been trying to tell them, both internally and externally, for years. So it has to be this inflection moment that has this great change of, I believe in the Holy Spirit very strongly, but this koinonia, this change of heart that is kind of happening with some of these people is kind of amazing to me in some ways. How could you have missed it? Is, I guess, for me as a Black person, that's my take on it.
Just to be clear, when we think about law firms, my field is grace, not law. So I'm not an expert on how law firms. Yeah, I'm not an expert on how law firms are set up or how their partnership agreements have been or those kinds of things. What I can tell you is I think we really did miss it. Like I have lifelong friends that we have real conversations about real life. At least I thought we did. And they're telling stories now that are horrifying. I have a protege who worked with me over a span of 4 years at our church, who's now a young African-American Yale Divinity School graduate, pastor of a mostly white church in North Carolina, and is sharing the stories. You know, last week he was pulled over for the first time with his wife, who is a law student, blonde hair, blue eyes. You know, she had never experienced this before, and the policeman came up to the car last week and said, "Get out of the car." And she said, "You don't have to get out of the car. That's not what the law says." And he said, "The rules are different. You're just going to have to pay attention." And he got out of the car. The first question the policeman asked him was, "Who's that white woman in your car with you?"
Mm.
So I'm confident these stories have happened all along. I miss them. That's all I can say is now, but now I can't unmiss them. And I agree with you. I think it's a work of the Holy Spirit. The question for me is this a sea change in our country, or is it a tidal change? If it's a tidal change, it's rolled in and it's going to roll out.
Yeah.
If it's a sea change, then the Holy Spirit is calling us to make a permanent difference in our community and in our nation. And I believe it's the latter.
If it is a tidal wave only, then shame on us. If it is truly a sea change and we can take this moment and really do something significant with it and do something about it, then the issue that has to be obviously addressed and addressed very clearly is systemic racism.
That's correct.
The admitting of, first of all, that systemic racism exists, along with white privilege, that it exists, has even been something that's been fought against for years and years and years.
But you know,
what I realize is that if you've not experienced it on the other side, then yeah, I get it. Now I can understand it from both sides. You don't see it. You know, I asked somebody the other day, what does it mean to be white? And they looked at me like, there was a great pause and a great silence. And then we kind of said, well, yeah, that's the answer right there. It means not to have to think about it, because everything revolves around you.
That's right. That is the definition of privilege. As we're soon headed to a break, what I would say about that is, to anyone in Houston, if you've not picked up Stephen Kleinberg's book, Prophetic City, he paints a glorious and despairing picture of our city. And he paints it in objective detail. You absolutely are entitled to your own opinion. You are not entitled to your own facts.
Yep.
And if you want the facts, if you want to deal in truth, then read Kleinberg's book.
Couldn't lead into a better time to take a break, Dr. Wells. Yes, by all means, get Steve's book. It will. Steve's been trying to tell us this for a long time, people. Not like he just woke up all of a sudden and Houston now is a majority-minority city, and that the demographics have changed and reality has changed. He's been telling us this for years. Again, the deafness of not willing or wanting to hear has not sunk in, but now in this moment, maybe it's the time to truly understand what I call him our local prophet has been trying to tell us for a long time. We're going to take a small pause and break. When we come back, we're going to pick up this wonderful conversation with Dr. Wells. So please stay tuned and we'll be right back.
There's no better place to knock out the basics than HCC. Whether you learn online, on campus, or both, HCC is the safe, flexible, affordable option. Register now at hccs.edu/college your way.
A natural disaster may force you to evacuate, and the coronavirus could impact your emergency plans. So take steps now to help your family and community prepare. Keep a supply kit stocked with cloth face coverings, disinfecting supplies, and hand sanitizers. Check with local officials about what shelter spaces will be open during quarantine efforts. And remember to review the CDC's guidelines with the whole family. Disasters won't wait. Neither should you. Visit ready.gov/plan to make a plan today.
the census when counting everyone in your home helps support your neighborhood for the next 10 years.
Let's go home and count Papi!
Make your family count!
The census helps fund schools, healthcare, and more. Visit 2020census.gov.
College is on at HCC. Whether you choose to learn online, on campus, or both, HCC offers a safe, flexible, affordable college experience. Register now at hccs.edu/college your way.
Welcome back to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. If you've been with us for the first part of the show, you know we have a fascinating conversation with our guest this week, who is the senior pastor of South Main Baptist Church, Dr. Stephen Wells. We've been talking about white privilege, white churches, white response to the post-George Floyd environment. And right before we took the break, Dr. Wells was about to make a point about white churches and this whole movement. Dr. Wells, please.
I thought we had good partnerships with some other churches. We do a lot with the Pleasant Hill Baptist Church in Fifth Ward. We do a lot with the Church Without Walls at South Main. Last summer, I was at a conference. There's a fellow called Joel Gregory who does a preaching conference for African-American pastors. It's called the Proclaimer's Place. It's really spectacular. And he had a vision for, you know, if Sunday morning is the most segregated hour, what if we could work on that even at the pastor level? So he invited some white pastors to come. So I've been going the last couple of years. This last year, there were 26 African-American pastors, 6 white pastors. And we were studying the book of Colossians, which is glorious. It's short, beautiful, some of Paul's most lofty rhetoric. You know, he's the visible image of the invisible God, all of that. But then you get to the end of chapter 3, and it gets to a household code. How do you run your house together? And it gets to slaves obey your masters. And then he says, and masters, you have a master. So get this right. And we started to have a conversation about systemic racism and what it means to be in America and to be Black, and that the Black church really was a product of the white church not letting Black people in. We segregated what God intended to always be united. And D.Z. Cofield, who's the pastor at Good Hope Missionary Baptist in Houston, said to us, the silence of the white church about racism is deafening in the Black church. And his words continue to ring in my ears. And so in the last year, I have been more mindful to call out racism that happens in the public square on a Sunday morning than in all of my ministry combined before. And, you know, there were times where people have said thank you, and there were times where people have literally gotten up and walked out of the room because that didn't seem like what we're supposed to do in church. It wasn't that they're racist. It's that this is such a foreign event in white churches. Mm-hmm. But if we care about the unity of the church, and if we care about the public witness of the gospel, this is a place where white churches have to change. If we're going to be a part of the work of racial reconciliation, you know, reconciliation makes no sense. Reconciliation means getting back together. But it doesn't make sense to get back together if the future we're offering in front of you looks like the past that hurt you. Reconciliation is predicated on change. And so I think among the first signs that things are changing is white churches are going to have to call out racism proactively, not to be asked to do it, but to do it because it's the right thing to do. And we have to earn a seat at the table of reconciliation.
That's very well put. So let me ask the question that I spent a lot of time with white churches, white congregations of all denominations. And the thing I've always found interesting is their ability to separate what happens in church, in the magical, mystical environment of the sanctuary, from real life that goes on outside every single day. And one of the churches that I spent a lot of time with in part of my ministry and my work is the Episcopal Church that has that great phrase, the frozen chosen. And your father, I think, was an Episcopal priest, was he not?
He's an Episcopal. He started as a Baptist minister, became an Episcopal priest, but that's a long story for another day.
We won't go into that. I'm just saying. And so I've had dialogue after dialogue with Episcopal congregations across this country who seem it very hard, particularly predominantly all white church or all white churches, to make the connection between their spiritual life that goes on within that sanctuary and applying those lessons that they're listening to every Sunday, hearing every Sunday through sermons and homilies and scripture, and realizing the reality of the world outside of them with all the hurt, the pain, the oppression, the poverty. I've always found that, to your point previously, I found that so incongruent.
Yeah.
How does that not connect?
I mean, historically, I think what happened in the Enlightenment is we separated, sort of moved heaven upstairs and we live downstairs, and you don't use the stairs very often. We have forgotten the prayer we pray every week, which is thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think part of what we have to recapture is the notion when Jesus ascended to heaven, it didn't mean he's gone away and we don't have access to him. In the New Testament, that's like saying he's become the CEO. He's moved into the penthouse and corner office from which he directs the work of the whole world. We've lost this picture that when he says to the Philippians that your citizenship is in heaven, that you're citizens of heaven. He was telling the people who lived in a Roman colony. Philippi, after the Battle of Actium in AD 42 or in BC 42, Julius Caesar Julius Caesar beats Mark Antony, and he has this large Roman occupation force. He doesn't want these soldiers to come back to Rome. They've got no job and time on their hands, and they know how to kill people. So he says, be citizens in Philippi, and while you're there, transfer Philippi to look like Rome. Bring the architecture, bring the art, bring your hobbies. The job of a citizen who's an expat is to bring the culture there. When Paul tells us our citizenship is in heaven, he doesn't mean when you die, you get to go back. You've got a passport already. What he means is your job while you are alive is to make the place where you are look like heaven. It is to manifest the kingdom of God. And that has to become a central part of our preaching all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for some pastors, depending on their own background and where they grew up and how they were socialized and culturalized in their own environment. And I get that. But at some point in your theological training and formation, there has to be something that talks about this outward otherness that you have to be always aware of in preaching beyond your own, as you said earlier, we're entitled to our own opinion, perspective, and viewpoint, not our own facts, not our own reality. And somewhere that has to flavor in what you do.
If you sing, let your heart be broken for a world in need, that what's supposed to happen after that is your hands and your feet are supposed to be in service to that world. Your mind is supposed to be engaged in that world. Your prayers are supposed to be for the transformation of that world.
So I'm gonna go back to my example of Episcopal Church for a moment, because I just want to clarify something. Those of you who know me over the years know that this is an ongoing conversation with me. Nothing against the current Episcopal Church or the Episcopal Diocese of Texas, or our great friend and leader, Bishop Andy Dahl. But I tried to study to be a priest for the Diocese of Texas, Episcopal priest for a few years. The bishops at that time told me that could not accept me as a Black apostolant, because even if I got through seminary and somehow got ordained, I would be ordained. There was no church to place me. There was no parish at the time that would take me or accept me as a priest. So I finally found, after trying 7 Episcopal dioceses around the country, the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago to accept me as apostolant, and I studied for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church for the Diocese of Chicago. And that experience, and I've told, and the current bishop knows this along with a lot of other people, that experience kind of left me in a way that it was interesting. It was racist, it was personal, but it was just universally accepted that there's no place in this church for someone like you.
Yeah.
And definitely no place in the priesthood in this church for someone like you.
One of the hardest things in the world is to be right too soon.
All right. So what came out of the experience, of course, is a lot of love and affection and growth in that whole process over the years, and friends in the church now. But the congregation at the time that was sponsoring me was a caring, loving church of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, the corner of Woodhead in Alabama and Montrose. And I had a whole bunch of clergy, a whole bunch of Episcopal clergy who came to me and actually met with me. And they were equally appalled at his response as I was appalled. And it's interesting how things change. Now, going forward today, that would be not an issue, of course.
Yeah, I can't imagine Andy Doyle saying that.
No. Andy and and the last 2 or 3 bishops, but that ship sailed, you know, so you move on.
Andy Doyle's got that staff with a hook, and he knows how to use both ends of it.
Yes, he does. And I've brought that up only because someone just this past week, yesterday actually, reminded me of that they saw Bishop Doyle's name on the list of the people serving with us on the task force, and they reminded me of my own experience, which I kind of pushed at the background because they knew about it also. But let's move on, because I want to get the last few minutes in. To address systemic racism is to build a reality of helping people understand that in this age, it's no longer enough just to be non-racist. You have to be an anti-racist. You have to engage. You have to make yourself, as you just said, Steve, inconvenient. You have to challenge people. You have to stand up. You have to show up, speak up, follow up. You have to engage with people. And you have to not let this past of being so conveniently and locked into your white privilege not allow you or make you want to stand up, because you may lose something by speaking. Is there not now a moral, ethical imperative that needs to be shaped around this going forward? And we're going to have to end on that. Just give us that frame real quick of that.
You don't have to turn past page 1 for that. It's Genesis 1:26 and 27. The first thing we learn about human beings in the Bible: in the image of God, he created man. In his image, he created them, male and female, he created them, and God blessed them. First thing we learn about people in the Bible: every human being is created in the image of God. You will never met any person who's not created in God's image. Therefore, they carry an inherent dignity. Every faith tradition in the world can say this ethically, that every person has a right to be treated fairly and equally. We all believe that. And so if that's our moral framework, if that's the first moral rule we learn, then ethically we have to work to see that that happens in the world. One of my favorite church mission statements is the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Kansas City, Missouri. And this is their mission: stand up, speak up, preach up, pray up, and pay up, but never give up, back up, let up, or shut up until the cause of Christ in this world is built up.
I like that one. We will have to copy that one, Steve. Listen,
It's
we're out of
worth
time.
using.
We're out of time. It went all too fast. We'll have to do it again later on. I'll get you and our good friend Bishop Dixon on together, and we'll explore this. And we'll get Andy Dahl on also. I've been already talking to him.
Be great.
Coming on
God
down
bless
the
you,
road.
Larry.
All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Listen, let me just end with this. So what we're talking about quickly is this frame, this context. And it goes like this. What is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? What is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? All human beings' lives matter. All human beings are equal. We got to have that conversation. We've been willing to have that conversation. We can even talk about what is the moral, ethical, fair treatment of all human beings. You can't get to the latter two of those antecedents, all lives matter, all human beings are equal, if you can't have the first one. So we are going to do that. We're attempting to do that in many, many ways. You'll be hearing about that in weeks to come. But we really want you to be engaged in this process and dialogue, as we always do on Dialogue Houston and other resources we have to do that. And we'll continue this. They're telling me I have to go, so let me just get out of here for now. Until next time, as always, we look forward to you joining us. Until then, be safe, be well, peace, power, and love.